Beacon Press Audio presents The Third Reconstruction, How a Moral Movement is Overcoming the Politics of Division and Fear by the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, with Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. This audiobook is narrated by Chase Bradley, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2016. Prologue, Go Home. Late August in North Carolina is harvest time for tobacco growers. Long before the sun rises above the longleaf pines, the air is already thick and heavy in the fields of the eastern sandhills, where I was raised. Men and women roll up their sleeves and bend their backs to prime tobacco, taking the bottom leaves first. I grew up in these fields, listening to the songs people hum when they know there's work to be done, and the day is only going to get hotter. Some days I still wake up humming those songs. August 28, 2013, I woke up at home in North Carolina. It had been a long, hot summer, and my body was tired. But as a mother of the church in Montgomery, Alabama, famously told Dr. Martin Luther King during the bus boycott, even though my feet were tired, my soul was rested. I woke up that morning humming a song I learned from mothers of the church in eastern North Carolina. I've got a feeling everything's gonna be alright. Oh, I've got a feeling everything's gonna be alright. I've got a feeling everything's gonna be alright. Be alright, be alright, be alright. 4 days before, I'd been in Washington, D.C. for the national commemoration of 1963's March on Washington. 50 years after that historic day, when millions of Americans heard Dr. King's dream on national television for the first time, civil rights leaders from around the country gathered to commemorate the achievements of freedom fighters who gave so much a half-century ago to guarantee the opportunities we often take for granted today. I sat alongside a great hero of that era, Julian Bond, commentating on the day's celebrations for Melissa Harris Perry on MSNBC. But as soon as the festivities were over, I knew I had to go home. I had been invited to go to Washington because Moral Mondays had gained national attention during that summer of 2013. On April 29, 2013, 16 close colleagues and I had been arrested at the North Carolina State House for exercising our constitutional right to publicly instruct our legislators. We did not call it a Moral Monday when we went to the legislature building that day. In fact, it took us nearly 3 weeks to name what started with that simple act of protest. But when a small group of us stood together, refusing to accept an extreme makeover of state government that we knew would harm the most vulnerable among us, it was like a spark in the warehouse full of cured, dry tobacco leaves. The following Monday, hundreds returned to the State House, and twice as many people were arrested. Word of a mass movement spread among justice-loving people throughout North Carolina, igniting thousands who knew from their own personal experience that something was seriously wrong. Throughout the hot, wet summer of 2013, tens of thousands of people came for 13 consecutive Moral Mondays. By the end of the legislative session, nearly 1,000 people had been arrested in the largest wave of mass civil disobedience since the lunch counter sit-ins of 1960. Those Moral Monday rallies were on my mind as I hummed the old spiritual that late August morning. 50 years earlier, in Indianapolis, Indiana, my mother had gone into labor on this very day. The joke in my family is that I, the child in her womb, heard that people were marching for jobs and justice in Washington, so I decided to wait for them before my entrance into the world. By the time I was born 2 days later, my parents' friends and co-workers who had made the long trip to Washington were back home. They had heeded Dr. King's words, "Go back knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed." Going back home, they did the painstaking work of building communities committed to justice, educating neighbors about issues that affect the common good, and organizing poor people to register, vote, and speak out in their communities. As inspiring as Dr. King was, historians are clear that it was not him alone, but rather the thousands of unnamed people like my parents who turned the tide in America after the March on Washington, guaranteeing the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and, after Bloody Sunday in Selma the following spring, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In fact, it was my father's commitment to go home and labor in forgotten fields that led him and my mother to return to North Carolina in the late 1960s, sending me to integrate the public schools in Washington County. I was drafted into the justice struggle before I ever had a chance to know anything else. I learned to be a freedom fighter by going home. Half a century later, I found myself a leader in the re-emerging Southern freedom movement, trying to understand a mass movement that had erupted in response to 21st century injustice in my own home state. Moral Mondays had not just happened. They resulted from the efforts of 140 organizations that had worked together as a grassroots coalition for 7 years. When crowds chanted, "Thank you, we love you," each week to the scores of arrestees leaving the legislature building and Department of Corrections buses, they were cheering on their pastors, their union leaders, their professors, and their grandmothers. We didn't just know one another. We were family. But as much as I knew the people and understood the long, hard organizing work that had made Moral Mondays happen, I did not know how to explain this sudden explosion of resistance. Though it grew out of the familiar ground of freedom, something new was happening before our eyes. Like our foreparents who marched on Washington, we in North Carolina were caught up by the zeitgeist in something bigger than ourselves. Something bigger even than our understanding. But we knew one thing without a doubt. We had found the essential struggle of our time. Inspired by nothing less than God's dream, we were ready to go home and do the long, hard work of building up a new justice movement to save the soul of America. So I was at home on August 28, 2013, that Wednesday when we looked back to remember the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Our Forward Together moral movement held 13 simultaneous rallies in each of North Carolina's congressional districts that day, bringing together tens of thousands of people who had been mobilized for action through Moral Mondays. We were black, white, and brown, women and men, rich and poor, gay and straight, documented and undocumented, employed and unemployed, doctors and patients, people of faith and people who struggle with faith. We were, it seemed to me, as I drove between rallies in Greensboro, Lincolnton, and Charlotte, a glimpse of Dr. King's dream, of the republic that, though promised and longed for, has never yet been. Baptized in the fires of mass demonstration, we were a fusion coalition of people committed to reconstructing America itself. On national television, the networks broadcast commemorative speeches and historical reflections on Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. Much of it was interesting history, I'm sure, but I witnessed something far more inspiring at home in North Carolina on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. I came home to the beginning of a third Reconstruction. After America's first Reconstruction was attacked by the lynch mobs of white supremacists in the 1870s, it took nearly 100 years for a second Reconstruction to emerge in the Civil Rights Movement. Though we ended Jim Crow segregation in the 1960s, structural inequality became more sophisticated in the backlash against the movement's advances. We have a black man in the White House that was built by slaves, but the wealth divide that is rooted in our history of race-based slavery is more extreme than it ever has been. Nothing less than a third Reconstruction holds the promise of healing our nation's wounds and birthing a better future for all. But we're not just waiting for it. We've seen what it looks like. This book is about the Forward Together moral movement that began in North Carolina, gained attention through Moral Mondays, and has spread to state houses and communities throughout America since the summer of 2013. As a first-person account of the events that led up to and beyond Moral Mondays, it is my memoir of the movement. But this is not a story about me. The most important word in the justice vocabulary is always we. This is the story of how some unlikely friends joined hands to reclaim the possibility of democracy in the face of corporate-financed extremism. It is an introduction to the fusion politics that give me hope for a future beyond the dead end of partisan politics in America today. because we can never know the ecstasy of true hope without attending to the tragic realities of the poor and forgotten. This is also necessarily a book about what is wrong in America. Among other reasons, we must heed Dr. King's call to go home because policy analysis inside the Beltway has become detached from the lived experience.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?